It's all about pure accountability at this point. I mean, the thing with Chief Bordeaux, firing him and hiring him, saying that fire inspector is not in the city charter or the ordinances, but then texting them saying you can be fire inspector, you just said that it's not ordinances. It's just about keeping accountability. I understand that the process was done wrong, 8, however years, like that shame on whoever, it is, but at some point you got to switch the narrative and start doing things correctly. And I think this meeting here is not to just continually bash, it's just to check the things that were done wrong in this process, because we know cricket complex is coming, more buildings are coming, more structures, so that we can go forward. So having that said, Chief Bordeaux, would you right now, in your opinion, because you don't want to use Mr. Lee's opinion, would you say that building 9 and 12, would you, under your jurisdiction with your certification, say that we should issue a permanent CO for those students, or should we continue with a temporary CO until another building inspection is done?
I would not. From the fire inspection standpoint, I can speak on. That is good to go. I give that a green light. I was there. I did the building along with Bureau Veritas, so I can give the fire inspections aside a green light.
For building 9 and 12?
For both building 9 and 12.
Okay.
And if you want to add on to the other 2 buildings as well, 1 and 5, I give the green light that the fire inspection is good to go.
Okay.
As far as any other type of inspection, electrical, plumbing, mechanical, whatever, that's not my expertise area, so I can't elaborate on that.
And let me just make a correction. I didn't fire Chief Bordeaux. I simply pointed out that the document that you all are referring to, and you said it expired in 2016.
2017.
Well, 2017. This is 2018.
Right.
So all I was pointing out was there was nothing in effect at that time. Councilwoman Hayes, Councilor Leah Hayes is working on the document that Fire Inspector Assistant Chief Bordeaux and I went back and forth on, and it just so happened it was, Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, we just needed some numbers put in because you had brought what we had talked about.
Correct.
As a draft for me to bring to council, and we just needed some other information, and then I went out of town. So there's nothing unscrupulous between he and I, and the process has been going forward with all of those things. So,
I don't.
Councilman Rowland?
One of my concern, I guess, on this thing, because we keep using Chief Bordeaux as the scapegoat, and then I still haven't got any paper document like I'm looking at, which is a report. So if he has a report, please let us see the report, because we're not talking about apples and oranges. Chief Bordeaux looked at something different than what Christopher Haver looked at and what Mr. Lee looked at. So let's be clear. So Mr. Bordeaux, what he looked at, he says he would move forward with that. But that is not what Mr. Lee says here, that he would have failed and not opened this building. And so if something's changed, please show us the documents. This is what this meeting was about, that we can see Mr. Bordeaux's report compared to Mr. Lee's report, compared to Mr. Haver's report, that is now saying that this building has a temporary CO. They had 14 days, a temporary CO means they had 14 days to fix any of the things that needed to be done, which I think Councilman Wallace said ended yesterday. So that means we should have some fresh documents in front of us that says that they've passed all 5, 4, 3, or 2 things that need to be done, and we should be looking at that today, so they can move from a temporary CO to a regular permanent CO.
Keep in mind when you reference Mr. Herschel Lee, this is August 3rd per his own email at 4 p.m. So when you say at that August 3rd,
August 13th.
August 3rd is the date that the buildings open for occupancy, sometime after 5:40. So Councilman Rowland references that somebody saw something different than Mr. Herschel Lee, and that's correct. But keep in mind, this inspector says many of the items could be repaired in a few hours. If you've ever had a house or anything built, it's not unusual for them to say you need to tighten this, you need to add a smoke alarm or batteries to the alarm, and other items would take a day or so. So at the time he left, you're absolutely correct. At 4 p.m., it did not finalize, but somewhere around 5:35 or 5:40, his major item of the hydrostatic pressure, which is in his email, was tested by Chief Bordeaux, who has the same requisite licenses. So you could look at what Mr. Lee says, but you also have to follow up on that as well. Some things continued that same day that changed everything. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, which one of you two is?
You know.
Okay.
My question or my concern is, Chris Haver seems to be doing two different things with two different sets of people. He says one thing to me, and then when somebody emails him or calls him, he says something different. So we can sit up here and boss this ball around all day. Chris Haver didn't show up today to tell us what we needed to know. He's not here. So we sit here keep guessing and going over what Chris Haver meant. We need Chris Haver here to tell us what he meant. So why we continue to go over this and over this and over this all this time? He's not here. He's not here. And if the student safety was that big of a concern for him, then he should have been here. Not only that, if the student safety was that big of a concern, why is he only sharing it with certain people and he's not sharing it with the people that really need to know?
Amen.
So that's my concern with Chris Schaefer. So I don't put a whole lot of stock in somebody who's going to talk out of both ends of his mouth. So he should have been here to speak up for what is wrong, what we're not doing right, so we can correct it. But since he's not here, we can quit bouncing this ball up and down this podium up here and just decide on what we're going to do. You're either going to have him come back or you're going to have him do a report. Because when I was on the phone with him, he told me out of his own mouth, yes, they can move in. Nothing that my guy did is going to stop them from moving in. But then it seems like 2 weeks later or 3 days later, he tells another set of councilmen something totally different. Okay, so, but it can't be facts. He ain't here to step on them facts. He ain't standing at this podium giving nothing. He chose not to show up for whatever the reason is, but if safety was his concern about the students at Prairie University, then he'd had his butt here so he could explain all of that.
All right.
Councilman Randall?
First off, Councilwoman Williams, I agree 100%. It was my expectation when I showed up today that Chris Haver was going to be here, but I guess that's the biggest issue is why documentation is so important, and why if Chris Haver isn't here, you have documentation, a paper trail that says, well, he said this on the 3rd. when I'm looking at the documentation, the mayor read off the email from what's his name, Mr. Lee, from the 3rd, saying that everything was good, just these minor details. But the documentation that they sent us from the actual inspection is dated on the 10th. And then today is now the 18th. I don't understand why in the 8 days we couldn't have gotten another series of documentation saying, well, the issues have been completed. Because to be honest, when I look at the documentation, I see pass, and I see fail. And so I was hoping I would be able to get an explanation from Mr. Haver about how it came up to be a failed inspection, but he's not here. But so all we have to go off is the documentation, the information that's provided for us. We can't. I speak for myself. I can't go off what people are saying because, as you stated about Chris Haver, people tend to talk out of both sides of their mouths. So that's why we and I think that's why we're having discussion now, because we're not doing our due diligence as far as the paperwork goes. If we had a better system as far as the paperwork, or at least making sure they had sent us something prior to the day saying, okay, everything's passed, just something saying counter to what the information that we already have. And I think that's why we're sitting here. Because like you,
So So can we make the motion to extend a temporary CO? Because the temporary CO is still over now.
But the thing about it is,
And if we don't issue a temporary CO, then technically there is no CO.
I agree, but the thing is, other than I don't even know what those actual issues are because I wasn't on the text thread. You know what I'm saying? So we have this list of stuff that we're saying are issues, but unless I call Chris Haver myself, I don't know what these issues are. And so we're here because we're saying that there's all these issues with these apartment complexes, but I can't explain to you what those issues are, and I don't even know what's stopping them from getting a temporary CO and a permanent CO.
And I think what's more important is the fact that you pass all this stuff, and then at the bottom, you put fail. So I'm not a construction worker, so I don't know anything about it. So how do you pass everything, and then all of a sudden the building fails?
And if you look at these are two sheets, two different sheets. These have like 23 items. Everything says pass, nothing on them says fail. This looks like an unfinished sheet. It simply looks like an unfinished sheet. Both of these have twice as many items on it. So to look at this again, you can't look at it in a vacuum. And again, if you look to Mr. Lee's note on that day, a couple hours before opening, he references all minor things could be done literally in hours, maybe a couple of days. And the main thing was taken care of by a licensed fire inspector. So, I mean, I'd be more concerned if the chief wasn't here, this one major item wasn't addressed that day, and people were moved in. They were not moved in, and for the record, because I don't think anyone really is aware of this, they were originally scheduled to move in August 1st. The word got out that they were moving people in August 3rd only because it hadn't been inspected and approved on August 1st, so it was forcibly moved. If everything had been inspected and approved on August 1st, they would have moved in. If it wasn't ready and inspected on August 3rd, they would not have been given the okay to move in. But that's how construction and building goes. You know, everything, whether it's rain or you just didn't pass the test or something, you move it until it's ready. So August 3rd wasn't a magic date. The date was August 1st. I guess you all heard about it on August 3rd and panicked because it wasn't ready. But if it wasn't finished on August 3rd, they still wouldn't have been allowed to move in. Yes, sir.
I guess my unreadiness to this whole issue is that because Bureau Veritas has not been to any of our meetings to answer our questions, but there's inspection reports with our legal documents with their seal on it to the city of Prairie, that you've referenced all these things on pass that says building failed by Inspector Christopher Haver, dated August 10th. Then we have a letter from Mr. Lee that Councilman Wallace had outlined different specific questions. And at the end, Mr. Lee says, I'll read it again. I told them that I would not leave any paperwork there indicating that it was acceptable to me for the buildings to be occupied. I also told them that if someone from the city told them to move in, that it was between them and the city, but I was not authorizing the occupancy. That's two people from who operate. This is dated on this 13th in the same email that we all got. All I'm saying is you have two people operating from the same company, and we know Mr. Lee's a third party from Bureau Veritas and Fire Inspection that we already know. Two people looking at two different pieces of this development that are saying in their expertise that the building was not occupied. Now I just want to be clear from the beginning. From now being the 18th that we're sitting here in our meeting, we had on the agenda to discuss, consider, and take action on occupancy, inspections, building permits, and any other related issues. How come we do not have the reports that you received, Mr. Mayor, that would give us the sound, us and the citizens, the sound knowledge and information to be able to know that the only reports we see in front of us says building failed, dated on the 10th. If you have those documents, please share it with us so we could then make an informed decision to be able to move forward. I don't know what's so hard. I mean, Mr. Bordeaux says he turned in some documents. Do we have a copy of that? And this is the part of the meeting where we get to see those documents, share those documents, talk about it, and shore up our process. I think, nobody wants the project to be shut down. I think everybody is trying to solidify what the process is, because we have other developments and other things moving behind this, and we simply wanted to know if we're going to go through steps 1 through 10, that all steps 1 through 10 have been done.
There was, and I'm referencing the emails from Councilman Wallace. Councilman Rowland, how many times have you spoken to Chris Haver in the last 10 days?
Spoken to Chris Haver?
Yeah.
0.
Okay, Councilman Wallace, how many times have you spoken to him?
Probably 2-3 times.
Okay, now you all, council, requested this meeting, and you're in touch with the gentleman who, because it's your meeting and you know what you wanted him to say, you don't have the documents that you say you haven't asked him for the documents. Councilman Rowland, you also made a very incorrect statement. Chris Haver sat at that podium twice in the last 5 weeks. So to say Bureau Veritas has not been here, and he was in this room and sat at that podium twice. Once that you remember, he was here twice. But the first time you probably didn't know him because he was brand new. But my point is, he came, he stood there, he answered whatever questions you asked or you couldn't ask. You didn't ask, so you couldn't answer them. So to say Bureau Veritas hasn't been here is an absolute incorrect statement. And you put emphasis on it. Bureau Veritas has been here. And a councilman who was involved in posting this meeting has been in touch with Bureau Veritas. So what document that you think he has that you haven't requested, because you know what? I haven't spoken to him. So if you're in touch with him and you call this meeting, why didn't you request what it is you're asking to find out whether they do or don't have it? Yes, ma'am.
I think another concern is maybe we need to be looking at Bureau Veritas, because if Mr. Lee was out there on August 3rd and it took until August 10th to send an email, and if the building was going to fall in, it fell in prior to that. So if they have issues, why did it take that long for them to send an email or send anything to address this when we were all there on August the 3rd, and you're just now getting reports about you don't think the building was safe? Don't you think a fine time to say that would have been on August 3rd, not August 10th or 18th? I mean, what does that say about Bureau Veritas?
Yeah, but keep in mind his email states his only major issue was the hydrostatic pressure that Fire Inspector, Assistant Fire Chief Bordeaux stayed and took care of. So if you're looking for documentation, the man is speaking to you here. There were 14 or so minor things that he said could be corrected in hours, maybe a couple of days, and his only major issue was taken care of. Councilor Olson.
Yes. Thank you,
Please,
Council.
help us out.
Sure. We're somewhat talking in circles. So I think at the end of the day, you had mentioned that there's some final inspection report forthcoming from Chris. Really, what he says over the phone or what he says at the podium isn't worth 2 cents to me. It needs to be in writing. There needs to be something that says it's passed everything to eliminate any ambiguity. So I think my understanding is that's what council's asking for. And I sure don't have a problem with y'all punting on the temporary CO for another week so that they can receive that information. To me, that fixes the problem.
And the chair would entertain such a motion.
We have the documentation, which is what people don't.
You don't have the final documentation.
Thank you.
We have the documentation that's dated on the 10th. And we're saying the final documentation that said building final said failed.
Correct.
And we're saying that if they're going to move forward, they should have a documentation that says passed. So the documentation dated August 10th is the last documentation that we have printed.
Agreed. I really think we can eliminate we're speculating here. We're making assumptions based on what has happened. If he is going to submit a report next week that answers all the questions about what passed and what failed, and if something failed, why it now passed, and if it necessitates a final inspection, so be it. They will do that, and the mayor can work with them to do that. But if we give them another week, extend the CO another week, and give them the opportunity to present that report, so we're not, we're guessing. And I don't want him to have to explain himself verbally unless you want him to, but at the end of the day, none of that really matters. It's what's written on paper. So that would be my suggestion, is you move in that direction.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Randall.
I move that we extend the temporary CO of, what's the place called? Panther Hill Apartments for another week pending a report that should be prepared and provided at the final. It shouldn't take longer than a week for us to get this report. Definitely, right? We have a city council meeting on the 27th, so is it unreasonable for us to expect that report on the 27th?
Bureau, and I will say this, Bureau Veritas has, as you see, we don't have it, and as recent as the day before, they were there inspecting and approving another 2 buildings right next to those 2. So I would give it like just whatever into the following week, if that's possible, but we can save it for whatever date you want, and we should come close.
Right now, we're
Yeah.
concerned with the buildings that are already occupied. So those are the buildings who showed up as already failed, correct?
May I suggest some language, just if you want to set a time for a week, unless they submit a request for an extension and a reason for the extension.
Perfect.
Okay, is there a
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded that the temporary certificate of occupancy on Panther Hill buildings 9 and 10, which are
9 and 12.
9 and 12, be extended for another week unless they request a reasonable extension. You've heard the motion, ready for the question?
I have unwritten.
Go ahead.
Can we also have that they report about the foundation having been inspected with the plumbing and electrical? What we do know is that the building was put up prior to the inspection, and we want to just make sure that those 3 items have been certified. When we had the conversation with Mr. Haver when he was here for the first time, he says that that did not happen, and I want to, if we have that in writing, to make sure that those foundation, plumbing, and electrical were done prior to the building moving forward.
So I think your concern is you just want those 3 items as part of the inspection, is that correct? You would like that part of the report? That
Yes,
they can look
that's
at.
correct.
If the movement would like to amend your motion to include those 3 items be included, I don't have a problem with
Yeah. Do I have to restate it?
that. No,
Yeah.
just so, in a second, you okay with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And just for the record, and it was in the same email that we've been talking about, Bureau Veritas has something in the middle of the page that says foundation passed on these 2 buildings, and this is building 12. So again, it's in the documentation, but we'll conclude with the motion. Any other unreadiness? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, do I note as unanimous? For the record? Okay.
And I just got one more thing.
Yes.
We've been asking for 2 meetings to talk about the city engineer. I feel like that's important, especially going forward, that we have a city engineer, so I'm just throwing it out there. I saw that the RFP for a city attorney has already gone out, that we can finally sooner or later have the discussion about the city engineer, the parameter that's by Johnson and Rand.
The RFP is going out for the city engineer as well. It's a requirement, it's automatic.
I request, just
And then the applicants will come before council as they did before. Attorney Hayes was pulling up the prior one. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say for the record, I requested that to be on the last meeting. So we should be able to have that discussion.
No problem. We'll update you as to whether it's not out and give you a copy of it. Anything else?
And I sent council documents of how other cities have pre-development processes. And so we can kind of start having the structured order to the way when people come in you know, this is something like they want to have, you know, requests for a city town hall meetings so citizens can see what the development's about. So I sent about 6 different cities. So whenever we have a chance, we can discuss that later on, so we can have something solidified and structured going forward.
What would be good, and I think what would take care of that is whatever the requisite committee is to put that up. Otherwise, it's being discussed in the
Well, do y'all have a
council meeting.
committee that you've created to look at that?
This is.
I mean, you can have your
council's
planning
bringing this
commission
up.
look at that.
Okay.
I'm okay with that. To come up with a recommendation. I mean, if y'all want to
Process.
appoint, you know, whether it's the standing commission, the planning commission, or some other group of developers and citizens to look at that and make a, you know, formal recommendation to council, it's an option available.
Okay. We can do that. Councilman?
One of the things that we have, Bureau Veritas has a packet that all the cities that they work in, there's a packet that I've also shared with everybody on council, and that outlines this list of things, this pre-development checklist. And so all we're doing, all they need to do, and we need to adopt, is for them to, or not adopt, to use, is to put up the City of Prairie View's logo on it and use that as our checklist.
That's an easy fix.
Anything else?
Can I, do I need to move to make that on the agenda?
I mean, it's a special meeting, so,
Is there an item for new business?
yeah.
It's not on
No,
the
not,
agenda.
not,
You can make a motion at any time to place something on a future agenda, so if you'd like to do that.
Could Mr. Mayor? I move
We're already
that-
giving that packet out, but if you want to put it on the agenda so I can tell you that, we'll do that.
What?
But it's the packet that you're talking about for Bureau Veritas?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. That when they come in and get a building permit, we're given to them.
I think the council member would like an item to discuss and take possible action to adopt their pre-development standards as city standards.
Okay. Pre-development,
Is that correct?
That's correct. And everybody has a copy. Okay.
and let's double check when you get a chance to see, because Bureau Veritas, I guess, has been there 6 or 7 years. So we want to see what it is we actually, what they brought them in under, because this should have been addressed long
I've
ago.
only been here about 3 years.
They've been here longer than 3 years.
I haven't been
At
on
least 4
council.
or 5. Yeah, you've been on council, this is your 6th year.
Yeah, but I didn't want to hear my first 3 years.
Okay. Anything else? Anything else? Meeting's adjourned.
All right.
tell somebody how long you keep it because